it's an interesting premise because we recorded a lot of songs, and there's been several lineups of the band. But I think for me, the original lineup was the one that was closest to my heart, you know.
Hey, I'm Paul Stevenson from VRP Rocks, and I'm delighted to be joined by a wonderful musician who's been here on the show a couple of times before, but we're going to get him back on to talk more about his Bad Company days. And we're going to really delve into the world of Bad Company and find out what his 5 favourite songs are from his time in the band. It's not an easy task to do, and it's not something that people often think about. So this is going to be an interesting one to see where these choices go. So please welcome back to VRP Rocks, Mr. Simon Kirke.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I think my first couple of songs, I mean, if I really could pick 10, that would be better. But 5 is really hard because the original lineup recorded, I believe, half a dozen albums. And so I think my first choice would be Can't Get Enough, because it was the very first song that we recorded in Headley Grange, you know, this English manor house outside of London, that Zeppelin had vacated because one of the members was ill. And we'd been playing Can't Get Enough in rehearsals for months. So it seemed the right thing to kick the album off with it. And the great thing about Can't Get Enough, it's like dong, gong, go, dong, gong, go. It's that sort of rhythm instead of the straight ahead, rock and roll 2 and 4, we call it in the drummers world. So it was a song that swung.
Yeah. And
towards the end of the track, you'll hear me almost approaching it like a big band drummer, like a shuffle, boom, 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 as the guitars play out. It was just a wonderful way of kicking the album off. And all thanks to Mick Ralphs, you know, who wrote it. And he played it to Paul Rodgers when Paul's band Peace was opening up for Mott the Hoople. And Mick was becoming disenchanted with Mott, and he wanted to leave. And he had this song that Ian Hunter refused to do. And he played it to Paul. And Paul said, man, this is a hit. This is a monster hit. And he was right. You know. So, yeah, I would say Can't Get Enough, definitely in the top 5. It's tough because then there's another Mick Ralph song which Mott the Hoople recorded a few years prior, produced by David Bowie, and it's Ready for Love. And once again, I think one of the best songs that Mick ever wrote. And every time we played it in concert, I always got a little teary-eyed about it because there was just something about it. Great singing by Paul, and unusual in the fact that there's a piano solo that Mick Ralphs played. It was in A minor. And instead of taking the traditional guitar solo route, he opted to sit down behind a grand piano. Made this lovely little simple melody. And the ending, the way it sort of drifts off, it was just great song. I play it today, even in my solo shows. I mean, I would play it till the day I die. It's one of those great songs.
Lovely track. Just quickly before you go on to the next one there, Simon, just because obviously those two are off the first record, and just a quick chat about Bad Company itself, how they come together at this point, because as you mentioned, there was Boz, wasn't there? There was Mick, and then it was yourself and Paul who'd come from Free, so it was almost like a super group of you guys coming together. So just talk to me about how the 4 of you did come in to be one band and become Bad Company.
Yeah. Okay, so as you said, I mean, Paul and myself were in Free, which had a very turbulent career. We didn't last very long. We were formed in 1968 and broke up finally 5 years later. But during that time, you know, we amassed quite a following, especially in England and especially in the North. But, you know, drugs, personal differences caused the band to break up. So I vanished. I went away. Paul went to Japan. I went to Brazil and hung out there for a while. And when I got back, I called Paul up. This was several months later. And he said, oh, I've formed this band called Peace. And we just finished a tour with Mick, with Mott the Hoople. And I got very friendly with Mick. Now, Mick and Mott the Hoople and Free were on Island Records. So we kind of, crossed paths occasionally at the office. I always liked Mick. He had a great sense of humour. So when Paul said, look, Mick wants to leave Mott and we want to form a band, you fancy, playing drums. And I jumped at the chance because I always loved Paul's singing and we got on well. But then the search came for a bass player and that took a long time. That took probably 3 or 4 months, which in the rock and roll world is a long time. And we had a list of 16 players, bass players, and we tried them all, and none of them seemed to fit, except the very last one, and that was the bass player from King Crimson. And we never liked King Crimson. That wasn't our sort of music, although I thought the name was fantastic. But I was not into prog rock at all. I much preferred Tamla and Stax and, blues. But this guy, Boz, was really quite something. Number one, he'd only been playing a few months, and he'd been playing bass in one of the most gifted musically bands in the world. How on earth he got the job is beyond me, but he did. And when he finally arrived at the rehearsal studio, we had all these sheets, called charts written out. And he said, I'm just playing with the song, I'll follow along. And I liked him straight away. So we gave him the key. It was the key of G. And he played superbly. And but first of all, he suggested we all go down the pub for a drink, which endeared him to us straight away. And we did. And we had a very relaxed rehearsal. And that really was how Bad Company was formed, And the one caveat to that is that we needed a good manager. And Paul, being Paul Rodgers, had his sights set on who was the best manager in the world at that time. The biggest band at that time, of course, was Zeppelin. And Peter Grant, we called Peter Grant. And he came down to hear us rehearse, and that was it. He said, Led Zeppelin were forming our own record label, and would you like to be on it? And we said, yes, please. And off we were off and running.
Silly question, really, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. So that's first 2 choices then selected, Can't Get Enough and Ready for Love. Let's hear what number 3 is going to be then, Simon. What are you going to pick next?
It's a bit of a toss-up because I want to include one of my songs because not for being, materialistic or narcissistic, but Weep No More was a song that one of the first songs I ever wrote. And when you have a songwriting duo like Andy Fraser and Paul Rodgers in Free and Mick Rouse and Paul Rodgers in Bad Company, you bring your offerings with a dose of meekness and hope. And I played this song. I did it on a cassette, and they loved it. I was so overwhelmed. I was so happy. Number one, that they accepted it and they did such a great job. But we had the money because we were very successful at the time to hire a 16-piece orchestra.
Yeah,
and I've always wanted to have strings on a song, and Weep No More was just wow. I still love it to this day. So Weep No More. And then, of course, this came from the second album, Straight Shooter, which had Feel Like Naked Love and Shooting Star, Good Lovin' Gone Bad, a whole, smorgasbord of great songs. I'm using up my 5 pretty quickly. I would have to go with Shooting Star because it became an anthem as we went around the world, and addiction being the monster that it is, and the toll that it has taken on and is still taking down many, many people. So it became like an anthem. And there was a time, this is a slight aside, but I
Mhm.
think it bears telling that when Brian Howe joined the band for a few years, he refused to do it, and that enraged me because it was a Paul Rodgers song and so on, whatever. And we didn't get on very well, as you can imagine. So one day I did a secret sound check with just me playing guitar. And I sort of snuck into the gig, and the road crew were in raptures. I sat down on a stool and played Shooting Star, just me singing it. And it became a huge part of our set. It pissed off Brian Howe mightily, I might add. But to see the drummer come off the kit, sit down, and just with an acoustic guitar, and then play such a heartfelt song, because I was having trouble with substance abuse at the time as well. So it meant something more special to me. Anyway, we did the tour and it became a big hit. So for many reasons, Shooting Star is a great song, great guitar solo from Mick Rouse.
Yeah,
So that would be
absolutely.
number 3.
I think that's number 4, that one, Simon. You're
Oh, was
using
that
up
number
your
4?
choices quickly, yeah. Just a
Oh,
quick question
yeah,
about
yeah.
Brian, if you don't mind.
I'm sorry.
We've spoken in the past, and you mentioned that you actually regretted the Brian period because it was
Yeah,
different to what happened in the earlier days. So just a quick
right.
question on how Brian came in. How was that decision made? Was it a band decision? Was it a
Okay.
management decision? How did that work?
Well, we had as all groups with longevity, you had your ups and downs and your
Of
peaks and
course.
valleys and whatever. And it came to a point. What happened was it all kind of fell apart when John Bonham died. And Zeppelin had been going through a lot of tumultuous times. Dear John was a human wrecking ball, and it ultimately cost him his life. Peter Grant became heavily addicted to substances, and the whole management just collapsed. And Zeppelin broke up, and we kind of felt abandoned. And I was doing a lot of drugs. We all were. So, Bad Company Part One came to an end, and we languished for several years. Doing
Mhm.
nothing. Paul Rodgers had taken off. He wanted a solo career, which was his right. And then out of the blue, I got a call from Ahmet Ertegun, who is the head of Atlantic Records, who released the Swan Song label. And he said, listen, you guys are wasting away. You spent 7 years building up this great band. Why don't you just get another singer? And yeah, I was bored. I was a little pissed off with Paul. He'd just taken off. He left the door swinging, as it were. He hadn't slammed it shut. But he was off with Jimmy doing The Firm and had a couple of solo albums. So we thought, fuck it, yeah. And I knew Mick Jones from Foreigner very well. He was a good friend at the time. And he said, look, I've been grooming this singer named Brian Howe because we think Lou Grant is going to leave. He's been threatening to leave for a long time. We're not getting on. But now Lou and me have made up. And there's this quote unquote great singer, English. You might want to try him out. So we did. And actually, for the first couple of months, although it was a different genre of singing, it
Mhm.
was more, more glam rock, if you will. It wasn't bluesy or soulful like Paul. But Brian wanted to work. He was a good looking guy. He was eager. He wanted to fit in. And it's funny, when he passed away a few years ago, a lot of people on Facebook remember Bad Company as the lineup with Brian Howe. It was not the original lineup that obviously came in the early 70s. So when Brian passed, he, to a lot of people, was the singer of Bad Company. Long story short, we had several turbulent years. He became a little bit of a pain in the ass, and we parted ways. But once he died, that levels the playing field, and I have no animosity towards him. I sent condolences to his family, and he kept the name alive. Bad Company was that version of the band was kept alive through us going around the world and keeping Bad Company's name alive. But personally, no, it was not a great time for me.
Difficult one. And just before we get to choice number 5 then, and your last pick from your days in Bad Company, just a quick mention about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because finally the band have been nominated. They're up there. We don't know what's going to happen, but fingers crossed you'll finally get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, give me your take on when you found out that you had been nominated, and what your thoughts are towards the whole Rock Hall thing.
Well, it's the first time we've been nominated, and a very good friend of mine is Nico McBrain from Iron Maiden. And he sent me a, congratulatory text. He said, "By the way, Simon, Maiden have been nominated 11 fucking times, and we haven't been inducted ever." So our management wrote to the Hall of Fame and said, "Stop nominating us, bollocks, fuck off." What can I say? If I was truly honest, I would say it's about time, because we've been around for so long. And hello, how about Free, which, superseded Bad Company. A lot of people had a lot of affection for Free. As I see it, there are 14 nominees, and it's the first 4 that get inducted. That's my belief. We are behind Fish, who have a huge social media presence. I've never really heard Fish, quite honestly. They're like the younger version of the Grateful Dead, but they've got about, I think, 100 and just under 200,000 votes. We have about 180,000, so we're second. I'm told by an insider that we are going to get in. We will actually know on Monday or Tuesday. That's when the votes are cast. So, I've already spoken with Paul about what song we're going to play. It's going to be Can't Get Enough. And I'm happy. I'll be happy for Mick, because Mick had a stroke several years ago and is in not good shape. And as long as he holds out, when we get on that stage in November, we're going to give a shout out to Mick, because he wrote the damn song. He wrote Moving On, and he wrote a lot of the hits, and he deserves it. So, it's about time, Hall of Fame. I won't say too much more. I'll get into trouble.
What was Paul's reaction then? Obviously, when you spoke to him, when you were told you're finally nominated.
Yeah, I met him a few weeks ago on the West Coast. I was playing in a charity golf tournament in Palm Springs, and he winters in Palm Springs. So we actually got together. And I said, "What do you think?" He said, "It's about fucking time." He was, we are pleased and we are honored. But there was always this nagging, every year that passed, and we didn't even get a nomination, because there's 2 steps, nomination and then induction. And we weren't even nominated for all those years. And it was beginning to gnaw at me. But anyway, Paul was, about time. What are we going to play? And I said, well, about Can't Get Enough. Because Mick won't be there. He can't travel. Mm-hmm. And it seemed to be the right thing to do. That's it.
Did you ever get a reason why you haven't been nominated after all this time?
There are several reasons. One of them being, I think, because Bad Company had 3 lineups, it kind of diluted our currency, if you will. It's, if you can imagine a band like Cream, and they change Ginger Baker, or they change Jack or Eric, God forbid, a couple of times, it would kind of dilute and muddy the waters of the committee. So, as I'm told by this insider, they wanted to do a free Bad Company double header, as it were, like the Faces and the Small Faces were inducted. But for some reason, it didn't show up. There was a political thing that I can't really go into without getting, kind of into hot water. But it was a combination. I think the main thing was the triple lineup, and believe it or not, Zeppelin had a hard time with the press. Obviously not with the public, and Peter Grant had a hard time with the press. And Zeppelin and Grant were slagged off so many times, particularly by the British press. America loved them, obviously, but there was this sort of, Peter had this bad sort of gangster vibe about him, and I don't know, it just wasn't a clear-cut, let's induct, Bad Company. There were factors that now have dissipated, and it looks like we're going to get him. Hope so.
Fingers crossed indeed. Well overdue. Right, let's get back to the matters at hand then, Simon. And you've had your 4 choices so far. Can't get enough, as you said. Ready for Love, Weep No More, and of course, Shooting Star. So we need one more track from your Bad Company years. And what is that one track going to be?
Wow, it's a tough one. It really is, because I'm going to pick one that a lot of people go, what? And it's a track that I've always loved, and it came from one of our less well-received albums. It came from I've forgotten the name of it. It'll come to me. The track's called Electric Land, and it was Rough Diamonds. It came from the album Rough Diamonds, which was one of our last albums.
I think it was your last album with Paul, yeah.
Yeah, Desolation Angels preceded that. Rock and Roll Fantasy was a great track, but I'm going to go with Electric Land because it shows the brilliance of Paul Rodgers' songwriting. And it was written about Las Vegas. And if you've ever flown into Vegas, you can see this sea of lights from 200 miles away as you're approaching it. And it really is this incredible, sight, especially at night. And what happened was we were driving from the airport into whichever hotel we were staying at. And there was typical American, there was a shooting and there were cops and blue lights flashing. Some guy was lying on the ground. And of course we had to slow down because of the traffic. And this struck an image in Paul's head. And if you analyze the lyrics, 45, took away his brain or took away, but Electric Land. So there was a pretty good story behind that. And it's got a lovely, and I got to tip my hat to this guy, Johnny Cook, who was the keyboard player, a session keyboard player at the time. He never got any mentions, but he really helped on that album. I don't even know if he's still alive, but he played beautiful keyboards on this track. So there it is, Electric Land from Rough Diamonds. People are going to say, yeah, but what about? And I'm going to say, well, I was only allowed 5.
That's the way it works. That's the rules. It's interesting you brought up something from Rough Diamonds, though, because I think to that point, the band had released an album every year, every 18 months at most. But I think there'd been 2 or 3 years between Desolation Angels and Rough Diamonds. So a big gap there. Could you feel that this was the end of that kind of, as we now know it, the first incarnation of the band? Could you feel that was kind of coming to an end at this point?
Yeah. I think it kind of peaked with Desolation Angels because Rock and Roll Fantasy actually put us in the Billboard Top 20 when singles were around. And that was like, what the fuck? Are you kidding me? I think we got to about number 16 or 17. But we were all doing a lot of drugs, not Paul Rodgers. I'm leaving Paul out of it because he drank, but he wasn't doing, coke and stuff. But me and Mick and Boz we were naughty boys, and that tour that surrounded Desolation Angels went on forever. I mean, it was like 100 days straight, and it really screwed us up. And by the time we came to do Rough Diamonds, things were really bad, particularly between Paul and Boz. And it actually ended up in a fist fight. And Americans like to fight, but once British bands start hitting each other, you know, it's the writing is definitely on the wall. And when we finally finished Rough Diamonds, we couldn't wait to get out of each other's orbits quick enough, you know. I've always had a good affinity with Mick. I never had any trouble with Mick, but Paul and Boz were literally butting heads. And it was a sad end. It was a sad time because in 1980, even though the album came out in 82, we recorded it in early 81. Bonzo had just died. Led Zeppelin had broken up. Peter Grant had gone into seclusion. Swan Song kind of imploded. And we were left really without any, you know, foundation, managerial foundation. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of just winging it in a way. That's not to say we didn't just phone it in. You know, we've always tried to make good music and good records. And I think Rough Diamonds, it got a bad review, but there were some good tracks on it. There were some really good tracks on it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, Simon. It's been a pleasure speaking with you again here on VRP Rocks. And just a quick reminder of the 5 choices. Of course, Can't Get Enough, Ready for Love, Weep No More, Shooting Star, and the 5th choice there, Electric Land. Some great songs, and even more great songs to choose from if you go back through the Bad catalogue of Bad Company music, which is brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us here on VRP Rocks, Simon.
I appreciate it. Thanks again, Paul.